Welcome, everybody, to the weekly Village Torah portion discussion with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. This week's Torah portion is Shemini. We are in the book of Leviticus. Now, the first couple of parshiot, the first couple of Torah portions have been very, very focused on various sacrifices. So, I know it doesn't hold necessarily a lot of interest. This is what a lot of the early part of the book of Leviticus is focused on. And but we get a little bit of narrative in this week's Torah portion, and there's a bit of a potpourri of topics, more so than we've seen in the first two Torah portions in the book of Leviticus. Last year, we focused on one of these narrative components, which was how the aftermath of the death of Nadav and Avihu. Now, Nadav and Avihu are two of the four sons of Aaron. And there was a very tragic incident that happened, a catastrophe in which they sought to offer. Well, actually, let me take a step back. There was a whole inauguration for the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sort of God's apartment within the Jewish people. So there's a whole inauguration thing, very exciting. And amidst all the celebrations, Nadav and Avihu offered up what is called in the Torah portion Ish Zara, a foreign fire, or a strange fire. It's incredibly unclear what this is or was. Whatever it was, it got them killed. Instead of their sacrifice being consumed by the Lord in sort of an acceptance of their offering, instead of consuming that, it consumed them. So it was a very tragic incident, and Aaron, it was very tough for him. He was actually quite silent. And so that's what we discussed last year. But in the midst of the aftermath of whatever happened, of what was going on, I actually want to focus on something that is not technically, is not actually narrative, although technically, I guess if someone says something, that is a narration of someone having spoken. So, but I actually want to focus on a very brief statement of the Lord, of God. And as we often do, I want to look into some medieval commentaries on, and even after medieval times, I want to look into some commentaries on this. Here is what we have in our really just 4 verses here in the book of Leviticus in our Torah portion. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Drink neither beer nor wine, you nor your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a particular law for all time throughout the ages. For you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, between the impure and the pure, and you must teach the Israelites all the laws which the Lord has imparted to them through Moses." So this is what we have. Don't drink. And fun fact, this is the very first time that beer appears in all of the Jewish Bible. So they're not supposed to drink really anything, but really specifically when they enter this tent of meeting. Now it says that you may not, so that you don't die. Unclear why this would necessarily lead to anybody's deaths per se. But nevertheless, it is identified as a chukot olam l'dorotechem. That is a particular law for all time throughout your generations. What I love about this, because I don't know about anybody else, I always love explanations. And when there's a very specific purpose, lahavdil ben kodesh uvein hachol, this and to discern or differentiate between the holy, the profane, between the pure and the impure, and also to guide the children of Israel of all of the particular laws that the Lord has spoken to them through Moses's hand. Okay, so this is what we have. Don't drink. The priests, the Kohanim, should not drink when they enter into the service in order so that they don't die. It's unchangeable. It's going to stay. It's also very particular to the Jewish people. It's not a broad universal law. It's something very particular to the Jews, and to differentiate these matters. Okay. And to guide. Okay. So I wanted to share several, actually five different commentators on what is going on here. Now, the first of whom we often bring up, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, born in 1040, died in 1105. He says, in order that you may be able to discern between holy service and sort of one which has become profane. So it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure how he means this between a whole. Oh, okay. So the rabbis and sort of what he's referencing here. Well, let me finish this. Thus, you may learn that if one performed a sacrificial rite in a state of intoxication, one's ministry, one's service was invalid. Now, he is referencing a rabbinic comment in the Talmud that this almost has to do with intentionality, mental intentionality. When performing this service, you have to have certain ideas in mind. You have to know that this, and this really goes back to the last two Torah portions, that there's a variety of different sacrifices being offered. And for the rabbis, it's not just simply sort of the basic mechanic of offering up the sacrifice, but also a certain mental intentionality. I am doing this, particular type of, this is a chatat, or this is a zevach shlamim, whatever it is. These different types of offerings, sacrifices, I have to have in mind what it is. And so Rashi here is mentioning, this is a oblique reference to what the rabbis talk about, that you can do it in a holy way or sort of just a general profane way. Okay. It's not very fleshed out, but that is Rashi's take on it. Now we're going to move on to one of his grandsons, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, born 1085, died 1158. And this is also a fairly terse comment. As our sages said, that a judge or a teacher in a state of intoxication must not issue any halachic rulings. Now, this actually comes from Rabban Gamliel in the 1st century of the Common Era. That, it's interesting because even though we have what's written here in our Torah portion, it really wasn't given articulation, certainly formally, officially, for the rabbis until the first century of the Common Era, that no one should offer Jewish practice, normative Jewish practice guidance while under the influence. Okay. Now we're going to move on, contemporary of Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, to Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, born 1089, died 1167. And he says, now what's this differentiating or deciding between pure and impure? He says, among cattle and things that swarm in the water and that fly. Therefore, the section opening with the words, these are the living things, which is about to come in this week's Torah portion. And then the sections dealing with the woman who gives birth and the leprosy that is found in humans, on garments, and in houses, one who experiences a seminal emission, a male or female who experiences a flux, and a menstruant follow this section. This is the meaning of and between the unclean and the clean. I found this really fascinating. Although this seems really dry, technical, I think what he's doing here, I find incredibly fascinating because it's really offering up sort of an introduction, somewhat of a prologue of thinking about all the things that are coming, that are to follow literarily, that we're about to encounter, that it turns out that, it's almost as if when teaching these things, when offering guidance on these matters, there should be a certain sobriety that attends to the way the people who are offering that guidance, who are teaching these matters. So before we open up, you should have a certain, and I think it goes without, certainly they're not mentioning it, but when one may consume wine or beer, there can be a fuzziness, and certain things might be sort of less distinguishable. So they're saying have a sober mind when discussing these things. So it's not just simply when going to the Ohel Moed, but really anytime offering guidance. Okay, we're going to jump ahead a few centuries. The next one we're going to see is Rabbi Ovadia ben Jacob Sforna, born in the early 1470s and died in 1550. So what he says is, we know from Hosea 4:11 that wine and new wine, or sort of wine and grape juice, destroy the minds of my people. Issuing decrees, verdicts, or religious rulings while intoxicated is therefore not tolerable. Solomon, And Proverbs 31, verses 44 and 5 is similarly critical of such a practice writing. Is that the right word? Okay. So wine is not for kings, O Lemuel, not for kings to drink, nor any strong drink or beer, nor any beer for princes, lest they drink and forget what has been ordained. So it seems that in Proverbs, there's a criticalness against sort of rulers being drunk throughout their days, that they're called upon to offer, to make judgments, to issue rulings, to make decisions. It's and not only impractical, but it seems to be highly improper for, just because you are the king or the children of kings, to sort of seemingly no one is above you. You have the highest power in the land. Yet if you were to spend your entire days under the influence of intoxication, it's good really for nobody. Many important decisions need to be made. Now, finally, this comes upon a really interesting comment, and this is much more recent. This is all the way up to the 19th century. The following is from Rabbi Shmuel David Luzzatto, born in 1800, died in 1865, and he says, it's not that Nadav and Avihu sinned on account of drunkenness. Now, I'm going to pause us there because there are a lot of commentators that when they try to figure out what is it that Nadav and Avihu did to sort of earn that they merited being killed, right? What was it in their offering of this Eish Zarah that caused their deaths? There are, let's just say, multiple rabbinic opinions, as one can certainly imagine, but one that certainly finds that really keeps popping up. It's really found a very solid footing amongst many commentators, rabbinic and otherwise, is that because what we're focusing on right now, of this instruction from God not to drink beer or wine when going in to offer up service, that because it seems to be literally juxtaposed against that story, maybe Nadav and Avihu died because they were drunk when they were offering up their sacrifices. So that's a very common approach to considering that story and what happened. So he's right off the bat saying that's not the reason. No. Okay, he said, and he goes on, because they hadn't been taught to drink whatever. They weren't drinking wine when they woke up on that glorious morning. It's not that that's what they were doing, but that it's really because they died on account of their having added something that the Lord had not commanded them. And the Lord, on the one hand, it's definitely nice to say, you know what, God didn't even ask us to do this. We're going to go above and beyond. God didn't even need to ask of us to do this. This is something that we feel out of a special appreciation we're going to offer up. But really, it almost seems to be the opposite of saying, you know what, God is asking for X, Y, and Z. Don't go beyond that. Just do what God wants. Just do what God has asked for. Okay. So now the Lord wanted to sort of, make Aaron and his sons very careful that with matters of the service, that they should not switch even one small thing, not even one little iota. And behold, it was as if he said, now this is Rabbi Luzzatto's words, okay? And it was as if he said, I knew that from this day forwards, you will not willfully do anything from your own minds, but now I am commanding you to be careful from even accidentally going against my commands. And therefore you shall drink neither wine nor beer when you come into the tent of meeting, lest you come to change something. Oh, interesting. So if let's say you're like, let's have a few beers before going in to do service. Maybe we'll accidentally do something, because certainly a certain carelessness may occur with alcohol consumption. And not only that are you being warned with the activity of service, sort of the provision of service, but also when you provide guidance to others in matters of holiness versus sanctity, purity versus impurity, or other matters of particular statutes of the Lord, you should be careful to not drink, lest you err in guidance of their sins to the Lord. So we have amongst these things, what I like really here about this last piece by Luzzatto is it's a very I want to say reason filled, right? Because what we have in the instructions are to really discern between certain matters and also in guidance. And he says, look, the best way to do that is to maintain a sober mind when in those particular settings. Otherwise, who knows what can happen? And I wonder, I'll be honest, I don't know contemporary scholarship into the ancient Near East or sort of contemporary cultures to the time of the Bible, but I would not be surprised if there might be a little bit of a polemic going on here. Who knows? Maybe Sumerian cultures or Mesopotamian cultures at the time could have frequently been having alcohol consumed during these sort of holy sacrificial times, and and we're going to be different, sort of that God sort of demarcating us off and saying the only wine being that's to flow within the tabernacle is intended for God's consumption, not ours, right? That we need to be of a sober mind to make these distinctions and to properly fulfill everything that we need to do. So, all right, Debbie, that's what I've got. Any questions?
Back in the passage, I believe before, where you spoke of, that was the first division of cleanliness and uncleanliness. Do you recall where you were?
I'm not sure, but I think what Luzzatto was trying to point out was that there's going to be a whole bunch of coming chapters discussing all these matters of purity, impurity, and other such matters that are about to come up in the chapters. So it's almost as if instead of, so you know what, I'm going to throw this in. This is the way I read it, and this is not in any of the words that he said. The way I read it is not so much that it's closing out what just happened as sort of part of the aftermath of the Nadav and Avihu, their deaths, but rather, instead of looking backwards, what he's pointing out is this is actually intended to look forwards. As far as literarily, we're about to have all of these matters that are going to be discussed in the book of Leviticus of trying to discern and differentiate between pure and impure and so forth. And he's saying this is actually sort of a prologue, an introduction of the way in which we should orient ourselves or have a certain mindset in regards to these. So it's more of an opening rather than a closing. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching and listening. Before we go, I just want to acknowledge and thank Jewish Home of Cincinnati for all Jewish life and programming here at Cedar Village are due to the financial and moral support of Jewish Home of Cincinnati. So thank you. And with that, I want to say thank you and Shabbat Shalom.